My name is Allison Hartley. I'm 28 years old, and until a week ago, I believed I knew exactly where my life was headed. 7 days before my wedding, I still thought the hardest decision I'd have to make was whether to wear my hair half up or all the way down. I was wrong. When Daniel Brooks and I got engaged last spring, it wasn't dramatic. No flash mob, no hidden photographer in the bushes. Just the two of us sitting on the floor of our apartment in Denver, backs against the couch, eating cold takeout because we were too tired to cook. He looked at me, hesitated like he always does before saying something important, and said, "I don't need anything big. I just need you." That was Daniel, practical, grounded, steady in a way that made me feel safe without ever feeling small. We agreed on a courthouse wedding that same night. It made sense, emotionally, financially, spiritually even. We didn't believe love needed an audience. We wanted something quiet, intentional. Money saved for a future home, travel, maybe kids someday if we decided that was right for us. The idea of spending tens of thousands of dollars on a single day felt unnecessary, wasteful even. But our families didn't see it that way. The moment my parents found out we were engaged, everything changed. Suddenly, this wasn't about Daniel and me anymore. It was about optics, tradition, what people would say. "You're our first child getting married," my mother said, eyes shining like she'd been waiting her whole life for that sentence. "We can't just let it be nothing." My father nodded, already halfway into planning mode. Venues, guest lists, speeches, expectations. At the time, I didn't fully understand why they were so insistent. I do now. My older sister Rebecca was still unmarried. Growing up, that fact always hovered quietly between us. Rebecca was the kind of person teachers adored. Top of her class, scholarships, prestigious internships. She worked at a major consulting firm downtown now, wore sharp blazers, spoke in confident, clipped sentences. She liked to remind me, subtly and sometimes not so subtly, that she had taken the right path. I took a different one. I'm a graphic designer at a small marketing firm. I love what I do. I love creating things. But to Rebecca, that made me lesser. She once told me I had potential if I ever decided to use it properly. I never forgot that. So when I ended up being the first one to get engaged, I think it bruised her ego in a way she never said out loud. And I think my parents were desperate to soften that blow. They insisted on paying for a large portion of the wedding. They called it a gift. Daniel and I hesitated. We'd never asked for it, but eventually we agreed. Not because we wanted the spectacle, but because we wanted peace. Once the planning started, it took over everything. I spent months choosing details I never thought I'd care about. The venue, a mountain lodge outside Colorado Springs with a sweeping view of Pikes Peak, felt like something out of a dream. Rustic wood beams, open sky, quiet grandeur. Daniel's mother, Patricia, was my anchor through it all. She treated the planning like a shared adventure, not a performance. When I doubted myself, she reminded me that the day was still ours, even if the guest list said otherwise. The caterer specialized in farm-to-table cuisine, wildflowers instead of roses, warm lighting instead of crystal chandeliers. Slowly, the wedding became something I loved, not because it was big, but because it felt honest. The dress was the final piece. I found it in a small boutique in downtown Denver. Lace sleeves, flowing skirt, nothing flashy. When I stepped out of the fitting room and saw myself in the mirror, I didn't see a bride performing a role. I saw me, steady, ready. My mother cried. Patricia squeezed my hand. Rebecca wasn't there. She hadn't been there for any of it, actually. No venue tours, no tastings, no dress shopping. Every time I invited her, she said she was busy. Meetings, deadlines, life. I told myself not to read into it. That was my first mistake. The call came on a Tuesday morning. "Can you come over?" my mom asked, her voice bright, too bright. "We have something important to tell you." I remember standing in their living room, the familiar smell of coffee and lemon cleaner in the air, thinking I should have trusted my instincts. They were both smiling like they were about to announce a surprise party. "Rebecca is pregnant," my mother said, almost bouncing. The room tilted. Pregnant? I hadn't even known she was seeing anyone seriously. My mind scrambled to catch up while my parents beamed, talking over each other about miracles and blessings and timing. I forced a smile. I even meant it. A baby is a big deal. A life. I told them I was happy for her. Then my father cleared his throat. "That's not all," he said. And something in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes told me my life had just split cleanly in two. I didn't realize how quiet the room had become until my father finally spoke again. "Rebecca wants to get married," he said carefully, like he was laying down fragile glass instead of detonating a bomb. "Soon." I nodded slowly. That part made sense. If she was pregnant, marriage felt like the obvious next step. I even opened my mouth to say something supportive, something sisterly. But then he continued, "And since your wedding is already planned, we think it would be best if you let Rebecca use it." For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. "Use it," I repeated. "Use what?" My mother leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes shining with a strange mix of excitement and certainty. "Your wedding, sweetheart, the venue, the caterer, the date, everything is already arranged. It would be such a waste to redo all that work when Rebecca needs it more right now." The words didn't register all at once. They came in pieces, sharp fragments. "You want me to give my wedding to Rebecca?" I asked slowly. I laughed. I couldn't help it. A short, breathless laugh that sounded wrong even to my own ears. "You're joking." Neither of them laughed back. "Rebecca is pregnant," my mother said again, this time firmer, like repetition alone could make the request reasonable. "She deserves to be married first. Don't you agree?" Something cold slid down my spine. First. There it was. "You do realize my wedding is in a week," I said. "A week. Invitations are sent. Vendors are booked. I've paid deposits. I've bought my dress." "Oh, that won't be a problem," my mother said quickly, too quickly. "Rebecca can use the dress." The room went very still. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're about the same size," she continued, waving her hand dismissively. "And it's such a beautiful dress. It would be perfect for her. You can always get another one later." Another one. Like dresses were interchangeable. Like moments were refundable. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. "Have you completely lost your minds?" My father's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone." "No," I shot back. "You don't get to ask me to erase my own wedding and then tell me how to speak." They exchanged a look. The kind parents share when they've already decided the outcome of a conversation and are mildly annoyed the child hasn't caught up yet. "Think about it logically," my father said. "We've already paid for most of this. We can't afford to fund another wedding right now. This is the only solution." The word solution made my stomach turn. "So your solution," I said slowly, "is to take my wedding, and give it to Rebecca. And what exactly am I supposed to do?" My mother smiled gently, the way she used to when I was little and upset over something she didn't consider important. "You and Daniel always said you wanted a courthouse wedding anyway. You can still do that, quietly. This time, it would actually make sense." Something inside me cracked. "You always said. You didn't care. It didn't matter to you anyway." "I changed my mind because you asked me to," I said. "You pushed for this. You told me it mattered. You told me this was important." "And it is," she replied, "just not more important than Rebecca's situation." There it was again. Pregnant. First grandchild. Urgent. I stood up so suddenly my chair scraped loudly across the floor. "You're asking me to give up months of planning, thousands of dollars, and one of the most important days of my life," I said, my voice shaking now, "because my sister got pregnant." My father rose too, anger flashing across his face. "Don't be dramatic. This isn't about you." That sentence landed harder than any shout. "Excuse me?" I whispered. "It's our money that paid for this wedding," he continued. "And if we're paying, we decide how it's used. Rebecca's marriage is more important right now. She's giving us our first grandchild. That child deserves stability. I stared at him, my chest burning. So my marriage doesn't matter because I'm not pregnant? My mother sighed, clearly irritated now. You're twisting this. No, I said. I'm finally hearing it. I reminded them, calmly, deliberately, that the money they'd given us was a gift, not a loan, not leverage, and it wasn't the only money involved. Daniel and I had paid our share. So had his parents. You really think Daniel's family is going to be okay with you hijacking the wedding they helped pay for? I asked. My mother opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. Let me be very clear, I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. I am not giving up my wedding. Not my venue, not my dress, not my date. This wedding is happening. The silence that followed was thick and ugly. Then my father exploded. You're selfish, he shouted. Greedy. You care more about a party than your own sister. A party? I snapped. You're the ones who turned it into a party. My mother shook her head, eyes filled with something that looked like disappointment, but felt more like manipulation. Anyone with a heart would agree to this. Family comes first. I grabbed my bag, my hands trembling. If family means sacrificing myself so Rebecca can feel superior one more time, then no, I'm done. As I walked out, my mother called after me. Think about what this will do to our relationship. I didn't turn around. When I got home, Daniel was waiting. One look at my face and he knew. I told him everything. Every word, every demand, every insult wrapped in concern. By the time I finished, his hands were clenched into fists. They don't get to do this to you, he said quietly. And in that moment, I knew something irreversible had already happened. Daniel didn't raise his voice. That's what scared me most. He sat on the edge of our bed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor like he was trying to keep something contained. When he finally looked up at me, his jaw was tight, his eyes dark with a kind of anger I'd rarely seen from him. They don't get to rewrite your life, he said. Not like this. I sank down beside him, suddenly exhausted. They really think I'll cave. They've already decided I will. He nodded slowly. That's because it's worked before. The truth of that stung. For years, I'd been the flexible one, the reasonable one, the daughter who adjusted, compromised, and smoothed things over. Rebecca took what she wanted. I adapted. My parents praised her ambition and leaned on my patience. Not this time. That night, Daniel and I talked for hours, not just about the wedding, but about boundaries we'd never truly enforced, about what kind of family we wanted to build, about how love without respect always came with a price. By the end of the conversation, we made a decision that felt terrifying and liberating all at once. We would return my parents' money. Legally, we didn't have to. Emotionally, it was the only way to cut the strings they thought they were holding. The next morning, Daniel called his parents. They didn't hesitate for even a second. We'll help, Patricia said immediately, and you can pay us back whenever you're ready. No guilt, no conditions, just support. I cried after that call, not because of the money, but because it was the first time in days I felt chosen. When we transferred the funds back to my parents, Daniel insisted on handling the message himself. He was calm, direct, unapologetic. We don't want your money, he told them, and we won't accept this kind of pressure. If you can't respect Allison, you don't belong at our wedding. My mother cried. My father threatened. Neither apologized. Then came Rebecca. I called her that afternoon, my hands shaking as the phone rang. Part of me still hoped, ridiculously, that she didn't know what our parents were doing, that this was all a misunderstanding. She answered on the third ring, her voice brisk. What is it? I heard about the baby, I said. Congratulations. Thank you, she replied. No warmth, no hesitation. I took a breath. Mom and Dad told me what they want me to do. A pause, then a small, humorless laugh. So, they finally told you. My stomach dropped. You knew, I said. Of course I did. I closed my eyes. Rebecca, did you ask them to do this? She didn't deny it. I suggested it, she said coolly. It's logical. Logical. You suggested they take my wedding, I said, my voice trembling now, and give it to you. You already have everything set up, she replied, like she was explaining a spreadsheet. Venue, caterer, dress. It would take me months to plan something like that. Why should I start from scratch when you've done all the work? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're asking me to step aside, I said, so you can walk into my life. You're being dramatic, she said. You'll still be married, just later. You don't lose anything. I laughed bitterly. You don't think I lose anything because you've never valued anything I care about. She sighed. You always take things personally. Because you make them personal, I shot back. You always have. There was a brief silence. Then she said, as the older sister, I think it's fair. And frankly, I thought you'd be honored to help. That was it. The final thread snapped. No, I said coldly. You're not coming to my wedding. She didn't react the way I expected. No anger, no pleading. I wasn't planning to, she said. It would be awkward. Of course it would. We hung up without saying goodbye. When my parents found out we'd returned the money, the fallout was immediate. My mother called me sobbing, accusing me of tearing the family apart. My father left a voicemail threatening to cut me off financially. Something that would have terrified me once if I'd ever relied on them. I didn't call back. Daniel did. He told them they were uninvited. When my mother screamed that she'd disown me if we went through with this, I surprised myself by saying, if that's your choice, I accept it. There was silence on the other end. For the first time in my life, I didn't chase after it. The days leading up to the wedding were strange, quiet, heavy. Friends checked in constantly. Daniel's family surrounded us with warmth, filling the spaces my own family had vacated. At night, I grieved. Not just the loss of my parents' presence, but the illusion that they'd ever put me first. And yet, beneath the grief, there was something else. Relief. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and bright. The mountains stood tall and indifferent, as if they'd seen this kind of heartbreak before, and survived it. As I stood in the lodge, the dress hugging me just right, I realized something that made my throat tighten. This day was never meant for them. It was meant for us. The morning of my wedding didn't feel the way movies promised it would. There was no frantic chaos, no dramatic countdown, no relatives bursting through doors with last-minute demands. Instead, there was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mountain lodge, casting soft gold lines across the wooden floor. Outside, the Rockies stood unmoving, ancient and indifferent, like they had no interest in family drama or broken expectations. I sat alone for a moment, hands folded in my lap, listening to my own breathing. That's when it hit me. My parents weren't coming. Rebecca wasn't coming. And somehow, the world hadn't ended. Patricia knocked gently before entering. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't offer platitudes or try to fill the silence. She simply smiled and said, "You look exactly like yourself." I swallowed hard. "I don't feel like the version of myself they wanted." "Good," she replied softly. That version never looked happy. When Daniel came in, dressed and steady and unmistakably himself, the weight in my chest loosened just a little. He took my hands and pressed his forehead to mine. "No matter what today brings," he whispered, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment I finally let go of the question that had haunted me all week. Why wasn't I enough? The ceremony was simple, intimate, honest. Friends filled the seats where my parents should have been. Laughter replaced tension. Warmth replaced obligation. As I walked down the aisle, I felt eyes on me, not judging, not measuring, not comparing, but truly seeing me. When I reached Daniel, he smiled like this was the only place I'd ever belonged. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves. No grand speeches, no expectations to perform gratitude for anyone else's generosity. Just truth. When he said, "I choose you," I believed him in a way I'd never believed anyone before. At the reception, we danced under the open sky. String lights swayed gently in the mountain breeze. The food was incredible. The music was imperfect and joyful. People who loved us toasted to a future built on respect, not obligation. I noticed the absence less than I expected. Not because it didn't hurt, but because their presence had always come with conditions. Later that night, as the guests thinned and the stars sharpened above us, Daniel and I stepped outside alone. The mountains loomed quietly in the distance. I used to think family meant endurance, I said softly. That loving someone meant letting them hurt you. He shook his head. Family is who protects your joy. I thought about Rebecca, about my parents, about the wedding they'd tried to claim as if it were theirs to give away. They never came. They never called. And for the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. We didn't steal anything from them. We simply refused to surrender ourselves. And that was the day I learned the difference.